This video is sponsored by LEGO Insiders Club. Welcome to Spronkington, my brand new LEGO city. But so far there are only 3 buildings, so in this video I'm going to build 20 and a half more. I'm also going to build 20 and a half residents, including some designed by LEGO Insiders Club members in the LEGO Play app. But let's start with some houses. Well, that was easy. So this is house number 1, literally. It's a 4-storey Georgian townhouse and it is very pink. Next I want to build 8 more, each in its own delightfully different colour. Okay, that was easy too. If only this was a result of several months trial, error and hard work. I call it Teapot Gardens, and I even built a pair of teapots into each porch, as well as giving each house its own unique roof design. Now I have a few options. The houses can either sit in a boring straight line like this, I can stagger them slightly, or I can arrange them in a semicircle. Definitely the semicircle. Finally I used hinges to connect them, and built a spiky fence between each set of stairs. But there's something I haven't told you. These houses are actually based on real life houses. So,
it's time for a very serious business trip.
I caught the 4:32 train from Spronkington to London to visit Chalcott Crescent, and honestly it felt really surreal seeing these in real life after having spent months building them in miniature. Anyway, back to Spronkington. The houses are finished, but I'm not entirely sure where to put them. I think with their curve it would make most sense to incorporate it into the curve of the train track, especially because there's lots of dead space behind them. For instance, the tube station isn't even visible, but it would mean moving the train station off-centre. So with no regard whatsoever for symmetry, I went ahead and moved them, which means it's time to move on to the high street. Oh, my finger's in shot. The plan here is first to terraform. I used precisely 3,200 blue tiles to make a river, then laid out base plates for the rest. This is just the foundation. There are going to be various different levels built off of this. I got to work building the levels, which was long and repetitive but incredibly satisfying. In fact, it took so long that the time lapses aren't even done yet, and I'm gonna have to find something else to talk about. Lovely weather in Spronkington, huh? There we go. It's done, and it is so cool to have a completely Lego-ified chunk like this. So far, everything's just been buildings on the wooden table, but this is entirely made from Lego. There's a river, several paths, green spaces, a road, a cycle path, and loads of room for buildings. Also, while I remember, I want to plant some saplings. Hopefully these will have grown into fully fledged trees by the end of the video. So next, we've got to turn this corner into a bit of a tunnel, so build up the walls, put a roof on it, and build a staircase. Alright, Bells. I added a basic shop front, and built up around the tunnel. The groundwork's all complete. It looks a little messy up here, but we're ready for some buildings. And I think we're ready for some minifigures too. Let's start with old Mrs. Green, who unsurprisingly lives in the greenhouse. She's the city's florist, and despite remembering the complex Latin names of all the plants she tends to, she's long since forgotten her own first name. She also can't recall the name of her beloved pet chameleon, so everyone just calls him Mr. Green. So it's decided, this first shop is going to be Mrs. Green's florist. Right now it's incredibly grey and boring, so I added an absolute ton of plants, plus gardening equipment, and these jail doors as a sort of awning. I've added ivy to try and conceal the grey boxiness of it all, and I can't get over how lovely this looks. Next up, I want to put the tube station here, Brimblecott Green. I built this in the previous video, but it looks somewhat odd and short here, so again taking inspiration from London, I built an additional 2 floors. It's now massive. We need someone to work in the newsagents, so meet Arnold Oates. He lives in the beige house. His sole hobby is collecting old newspapers, and most days he feels hopelessly lonely. Don't worry though, we'll come back to him later. Now the apartment above Brimblecott Green is currently empty, and I want one of you to move in. You see, in the previous video, I talked about LEGO Insiders Club and the avatar builder, and encourage you to express your creativity by making your own and tagging me. So I thought it would be fun to take some of those avatars you made, and build them in real life for my city. So let me introduce you to Spronkington's newest resident, designed by one of you. How cool is that? I'll do some more later. Anyway, I want many of these high street buildings to be Tudor inspired, with prominent timber frames and crooked staggered floors. I did this using a sideways building technique, and however fiddly it may have been, the results were most definitely worth it. Seriously, this took me forever, but it looks stunning. This is going to be a fishmonger's, run by Finn, who lives in the salmon-coloured house, although he's grown tired of his job and dreams of one day opening an aquarium. Next door is something I definitely had to include in Spronkington, a pizzeria. I added a sign, awning, moped and menu. It's run by aspiring opera singer Cecilia Cristini, who lives in the flat upstairs and can often be heard singing well into the small hours of the morning. I really like playing around with the widths of each shop like this, and at only 8 studs wide, this one's pretty narrow. But we can do better. This rather silly building is only 6 studs wide and houses Spronkington cheesemongers, run by husband and wife team Lester and Bree, who live in the yellow house. Lester is a cheese addict and can't stop eating the stuff, and Bree is 8.5 months pregnant. So the building's very thin, but we can still do better. This incredibly silly building is now only 4 studs wide, and I think we've hit the extreme of what can still constitute a building instead of merely a wall. Now we can't just put these absurdly thin buildings in a row. In between I built a bookshop, and I allowed myself to get a bit more creative here. I used brown box pieces as a detailed wood panel facade, as well as transparent plates for a stained glass window, and these ingot pieces as book spines. I then built a pair of outdoor book stands. I just think it gives the street so much more life when the shops are sort of spilling out onto it. The shop is run by Rose Scribbler, who lives in the pink house, an author currently troubled by unwavering writer's block. Now there's room in the apartment above the bookshop for another one of you, so again checking the post you tagged me in on the LEGO Play app, I raided my minifigure parts and added another new resident to Spronkington. I'm gonna put the thin blue one next, and I think wait one more before the cheesemongers. This tiny building is actually an office, and inside works Graham, the occupant of the grey house. He's impressively young to be so wildly successful, but in the midst of a crippling existential crisis. He's also convinced his house is haunted, and he's not wrong. Obviously, Spronkingtonians are going to need somewhere to buy their food, so this next building, and probably the most elaborate of them all, is a grocer's. This was immensely difficult to build, especially figuring out the weirdly shaped roof, but it's perfect. It wouldn't look out of place on any British high street. Finish it off with bananas, apples, oranges, tomatoes, sweet corn, carrots and pumpkins, and it looked wonderful. It's owned by Nadia, who lives in the blue house with her brother, train driver Omar. Nadia dreams of one day growing a prize-winning vegetable, whilst Omar is already living his dream, driving trains all day. Next door was a perfect spot for the cheesemongers. Then next to that, I built a vet's, a fairly simple building run by Kat. She lives in the mint-coloured house with husband Noah, who runs a local animal shelter I haven't built yet, and the pair can't seem to stop themselves adopting every animal in town. Yet another Tudor-style building next door houses the barbers, with the blue, white and red barber's pole and stripy awning. Which brings us to the big one. You see, my very favourite building in the whole of London is this, the Granada Tooting Cinema, an Art Deco masterpiece. It's definitely seen better days, but in its prime, hosted acts such as the Beatles, the Rolling Stones and Frank Sinatra. It's sad to see it in the state it's in today, so I attempted to restore it to its former glory right here in Spronkington. It's gigantic, and includes a retro cinema letterboard, LEGO-themed movie posters, and a ticket booth and popcorn booth. You'd be forgiven for calling it clunky. I'm not sure how well it translates to LEGO bricks, or I guess how good of a job I've done, but doesn't the high street as a whole just look incredible? The cinema's run by colourful eccentric Periwinkles, who live in the purple house, although their 2 terminally embarrassed children hate colour and hate cinema. The final high street building for now is going to be a tailor's, although the owner recently quit, so it's closed until further notice. For the flat above though, I built another of your creations. Seriously, these are amazing. You should definitely check out the avatar builder. The link is in the description. That's the high street more or less done. It's looking absolutely glorious, but now it's time to add all the details that are really going to bring it to life. Now the LEGO Play app also has this really cool pattern designer, and several of you tagged me in your mosaics too. A few were floral themed, so I decided to build them for real, albeit with circles instead of squares. I put them near Mrs. Green's florist on this large empty wall. I then built some fence posts and chains to stop people falling off the edge. Then it was just the finishing touches. Benches, bins, lampposts, a pair of small jetties, and a fence to separate the train track at the far side. And would you look at that? The trees are now fully grown, and extremely fragile. But what became of our residents? Well, Arnold Oates was reading an old newspaper when he discovered an article about Mrs. Green, documenting her youth as a globe-trotting botanist. I'm not going to share it with you, it's between them, but she was delighted to find out her first name, and he was delighted to find companionship. Finn sold the fishmongers, and bought a plot of land upon which he plans to build Spronkington Aquarium, whilst Lester and Bree had their baby, Belle. Okay, that was cheesy. Rose Scribbler still has writer's block. I guess I couldn't figure out her story, and Graham befriended the ghost, who in death taught him all about life. They now get pizza together every Tuesday. Kat and Noah adopted even more animals, and whilst Nadia's giant carrot wasn't quite prize-winning, she did beat her own record. Omar is still driving trains, Cecilia is still singing, and the Periwinkle children eventually warmed to cinema. All it took was horror movie The Brick Separator. They still hate colour though. So there we have it, Teapot Gardens and Spronkington High Street. There's still loads to do. I'm not sure if it's ever really going to be finished, but compared to the other two sides, which are just wood, it looks like an actual LEGO city. The city's really taking shape, although it's probably going to be a few months before the next update. Building all this from scratch takes a while. And don't forget, you can still build yourself as a digital avatar by downloading the LEGO Play app and joining LEGO Insiders Club. It doesn't cost and is full of fun things to do. I'll even be able to see your avatars if you share it in LEGO Play and use the hashtag #halfasleep. Follow the link in the description to download.